It's Thursday, June 5th, 2025. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Grant Herms. I am back this week after a little break earlier this week, and even though I only really took like 2 days off, it feels like 2 weeks because since the last episode, a lot has happened inside the Trump administration specifically, and it seems like things are starting to unravel a little bit, whether it's Trump ending a 45-year-long project to pack federal courts with conservative judges, or Stephen Miller being so maniacally bent on deportations that it might break immigration and customs enforcement, or the complete meltdown between Donald Trump and Elon Musk that is actively playing out in public as I'm recording, which we're going to talk about today. But first, make sure you're following Make It Make Sense on whatever podcast app you're listening to this on, and on YouTube. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack, where I've got new articles going up all the time, including 2 new ones on the way, all about the time senators said they wouldn't vote for the exact thing they're talking about voting for now, and a breakdown of the new Supreme Court rulings that came out this week. Those will be up this weekend, but just for paid subscribers. It is just $5 a month. If you don't want to do that, please share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on Twitter and Blue Sky, and at Grant Herms TV on everything else. All right, let's get to today's episode. Now, I know a lot of you here are hoping to hear about the Trump-Musk fight, and I will be going into that because, let's be honest, it's juicy. It's important, but it's also the closest thing you're going to get to a Housewives of the West Wing. But while that is the flashiest meltdown happening right now, there are 2 others this week that are worth talking about, and I think that show that the breakneck pace of this administration is starting to catch up to it. So first is Trump's falling out with the legal group, the Federalist Society. It's not super important for what we're talking about to know all the ins and outs of what this group does or has done, but what you should know is that the group has been around since the mid-1980s and was founded to take a conservative approach to the law, to be generous about it. But for decades, the group has been run by a guy named Leonard Leo, and he's an ultra-conservative Catholic, part of a Catholic pseudo-cult known as Opus Dei, who has made it his mission and the mission of the Federalist Society to not just file things in conservative-leaning cases, but dictate which judges would get nominated to federal courts and the Supreme Court. Nearly every conservative member of the court today, the Supreme Court that is, has a tie to the Federalist Society, and all 3 of the justices that Trump appointed in his last term, Brett Kavanaugh, Neil Gorsuch, and Amy Coney Barrett, all were handpicked by Leonard Leo and his organization. And every year, the Federalist Society puts out a list of the approved conservative judges and legal scholars who they want to become judges. And for decades now, Leo has gotten what he's wanted here. He was able to do that with a lot of backing from wealthy donors and putting pressure on Republican politicians because of those donors to stay in office. But it's not just the judges that he's been able to put in place, but also the cases that they're ruling on. The Federalist Society spends a lot of time and money finding what they consider to be winnable cases to be brought essentially to the Supreme Court to remake federal law, including cases fighting desegregation, opposing a state's right to enact gun control laws, ending abortion, and allowing billionaires and corporations to give unlimited amounts of money to politicians without being forced to do so publicly. Essentially, as the outlet ProPublica put in their massive investigation from 2023, Leonard Leo has remade the American legal system. And for more than a decade, Trump has benefited immensely from that and has been more than happy to work with Leonard Leo and his society. That is until this week, when the White House started to go after Leo and the judges that he's handpicked, many of whom Trump appointed because of that, because those judges have ruled against Trump nearly 3/4 of the time when a case has been brought before a conservative judge in the last 5 months. Here's what White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller had to say on CNN.
You heard President Trump himself say that the Federalist Society And Leonard Leo has created a broken system for judicial vetting. And God knows this time around, we are
does that mean he doesn't support picking Amy Coney Barrett for the Supreme Court?
What it means is simply this and nothing more. We're not going to be using the Federalist Society to make judicial nominations at all going forward.
Now, we'll come back to Stephen Miller quite a bit today, actually. But for him to say this, to freeze out Leonard Leo, is a huge deal because, like I said, for decades now, going back to the Reagan administration, the Federalist Society has been a place where conservative legal theories and stars have been made. It's not that there aren't other places, but it is truly the only place that has mattered as much as this, and where a lot of recruiting, not for just judges and justices, has taken place, but also for attorneys general, solicitors general, members of Congress, senators, governors, and even presidents, has all funneled through. It's become a bedrock organization on the right, and the White House announced it was cutting it off, which could have serious implications for how cases play out going forward for this second Trump administration, which right now has more than 120 lawsuits already ongoing, with undoubtedly many more on the way. But moving on here, let's talk more about Stephen Miller, because our next, two looks at how we're seeing how things might be coming apart involve him more or less directly. First, it was reported earlier this week that Stephen Miller is angry at Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, for doing exactly what the Department of Homeland Security, the White House border czar, the head of ICE, and Trump himself have all been promising to do, which is to target immigrants convicted of crimes in the arrests for deportations. According to the Washington Examiner, a conservative outlet in D.C., Miller has been threatening higher-up officials in ICE because he wants to see arrests increase to a minimum of 3,000 a day, which is about twice the daily record that was set back in May and nowhere near the average happening right now. A source told the Examiner, quote, "Miller came in there and eviscerated everyone. You guys aren't doing a good job. You're horrible leaders." And when those ICE leaders told Miller they were following what the White House border czar wanted them to do, Miller said, quote, "What do you mean you're going after criminals?" Asking, "Why aren't you at Home Depot? Why aren't you at 7-Eleven?" Saying Miller essentially wants everybody arrested. Now, I have talked about Miller before. The guy has a long history of supporting and spreading white supremacist ideology and writing, and once said ending asylum seeking in the U.S. was the only thing in his life. But this is beyond what we have ever heard before come out of meetings like this. And I do have to say here that an ICE spokesperson said that this recounting of this meeting is inaccurate, although they did not go into any more details. And we do know that this interaction forced the exits of several higher-up ICE officials, and sources have told several outlets at this point that Miller's repeated anger in these meetings with ICE officials has caused morale to take a nosedive. And on top of that, because they're getting conflicting orders from DHS and White House officials like border czar Tom Homan and Miller, who is technically the number 3 in the administration as the deputy chief of staff, ICE officers right now don't know who they should be going after, which has started to paralyze the agency. Now, not that raids aren't still ongoing and that people aren't being scooped up and disappeared, because that is still happening. It's just not on the scale the White House promised its voters it would happen on, because Miller is behaving this way. Now, finally, let's get to the drama surrounding Elon Musk and Donald Trump, which does, again, involve Stephen Miller. So last week, Elon Musk had his last day in the White House, where Trump presented him with a big gold key to the government, I guess? I don't know. It had some real Francis Scott Key vibes from Veep to it. But Musk was there clearly on some kind of substance. I do not know how else to explain his behavior in the Oval Office. He was rocking back and forth, and then his eyes would roll back in his head, and then his whole head would roll around. And then he had this black eye on his right eye, which he said was given to him by his 5-year-old son, whom he told to punch him in the face, which is, totally a normal thing to ask for. Well, since that Oval Office ceremony, I guess we could say, there is some speculation that the black eye actually came from either Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who I talked about last week on the Substack, as having gotten into at least one very loud shouting match outside the Oval Office with Musk that may have turned physical according to several accounts, or from Stephen Miller, because Miller's wife, although presumably soon-to-be ex-wife, left Miller for Musk after becoming Musk's assistant during his time at the White House. The two have not seen eye to eye for a long time, if you'll forgive the pun, and there's been a lot of noting that Miller is left-handed and the shiner that Musk had is on his right eye. But that bizarre instance and frankly gossip aside, once Musk left the White House, he started attacking it, and specifically attacking the big, beautiful bill that's making its way through the Senate right now. This is the one that I talked about last week that would raise the national deficit by some new numbers we just got that are $2.4 trillion. It would cut health care for 11 million people. It would cut food benefits for millions of children and give millions of dollars in tax breaks to the wealthiest Americans, all to be paid for by the poorest Americans. Now, just in the last few days, Musk has taken to Twitter, or X, which he owns, and has gone on these long rants about the bill. Partly, he's upset because he thinks the government is going to go bankrupt. No real economists think that, but they do think some pretty hard times are on the way if this thing gets passed. He also hates this bill partly because it cuts subsidies for electric vehicles, which he needs to keep his car company Tesla afloat after its stock has cratered since he got involved in politics, and partly because he's mad that he's on the outside now. Case in point, a pair of tweets that he sent out just today saying, quote, "Without me, Trump would have lost the election, Democrats, would have won the House, and Republicans would be 51-49 in the Senate." Then in a separate tweet saying, "Such ingratitude." So, two things here. First, the ingratitude thing is really close to the "did you even say thank you" thing that JD Vance levied at Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky during that pretty disastrous White House meeting between those world leaders. And essentially what Vance was saying there is, don't you know who controls you? So with Musk saying Trump is an ingrate, he's basically saying, don't you know who controls you to Donald Trump, which did make Trump angry. And the second thing, which likely made Trump even angrier, is Musk taking credit for the election win. There are very few things, if anything for that matter, that Trump holds more dear than his ability to win his elections. And I will say, his ability to campaign is unmatched for any politician alive right now. So for Musk to publicly undercut that thing here just sent Trump into high gear. Here's what he said in the Oval Office today.
He was here for a long time. You saw a man who was very happy when he stood behind the Oval desk. And even with the black eye, I said, "Do you want a little makeup? We'll get you a little makeup." But he said, "No, I don't think so," which is interesting and very nice. He wants to be who he is, so you could make that statement too, I guess. Look, Elon and I had a great relationship. I don't know if we're well anymore. I was surprised because you were here. Everybody in this room practically was here as we had a wonderful send-off. He said wonderful things about me. You couldn't have nicer. Said the best things. He's worn the hat. Trump was right about everything. And I am right about the great, big, beautiful bill.
So, not great, but tepid, let's say. But then, after that Oval Office meeting, Trump got his phone back and hopped on his social media site, Truth Social, and went full scorched earth. First, he was saying that, quote, Elon was wearing thin. I asked him to leave. I took away his EV mandate that forced everyone to buy electric cars that nobody else wanted, that he knew for months I was going to do, and he just went crazy, which he wrote in all caps. And then he went for Musk's weak spot, the nuclear option here, saying the easiest way to save money in our budget, billions and billions of dollars, is to terminate Elon's governmental subsidies and contracts. I was always surprised that Biden didn't do it. So this is a slight at the work that was being done by Doge, because Elon Musk promised to find $2 trillion in savings and then downgraded that to about $150 billion, so a very very long way off. And when you look at really what he might have saved, it's a lot less. We are talking maybe in the single-digit billion-dollar numbers, because Musk really didn't do a whole lot while he was there, and they didn't really find a lot of waste, fraud, or abuse, if really any. But the other thing here is that Musk's entire $420 billion fortune is really built on knowing how to game the U.S. subsidy and contract system. He has hundreds of millions of dollars tied up in government contracts that have allowed him to prop up his companies while marketing himself as some kind of self-made business genius. It's why Musk did so much to dismantle a lot of the regulatory agencies that were targeting his businesses, while also keeping the ones that had contracts with safe when he ran the Department of Government Efficiency that isn't really a department. And then we get maybe the biggest bombshell of this entire fallout so far, which first, Musk tweets out, "Time to drop the really big bomb. Donald Trump is in the Epstein files. That is the real reason they have not been made public. Have a nice day, DJT." And then that gets retweeted by a very prominent person on right-wing social media called Ian Miles Chong, who said Trump should be impeached and JD Vance should replace him, to which Elon Musk replied, yes, which this is a huge deal. It is extremely uncommon, if it's even ever happened before, for a current top advisor to the White House, to the president, to call for that president's impeachment. It is also, even if you don't care about that part of it, it is the richest man on the planet calling for the impeachment of the president that he helped install into the White House. It doesn't really get much bigger than this. But that brings us to where all of this is going to come to a head in the Senate's working to pass that big, beautiful spending bill. I hate that they call it that, by the way. Now, Musk has gone out of his way to bash this bill at every turn since leaving the White House. Trump still wants it to go through to give people like himself a tax break, but as more and more comes out about what's in the bill, which is more than 1,000 pages long, it's really clear that very few Republicans read part of this bill, if any of it at all. And a lot of them are starting to back off. Here's Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, one of Trump's biggest and loudest supporters, saying she was unaware of a part of the bill that would prevent regulations on AI and urged the Senate not to support it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to address the House about a clause that is in the One Big Beautiful Bill. This clause would take away state rights to make laws or regulate AI for 10 years. I think federalism is something that we must always protect, and I warn against the dangers of protecting a tech industry where we have no idea the future of what this industry will hold.
It should be clear here. It is extremely rare for her to go against Trump. I'm actually not even sure I've heard her do it since he was elected this time around, maybe since, I'm not even sure, since before January 2021. But then in the Senate, things are getting even worse because that's really where the rubber is meeting the road right now. This is Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin, a senior member of the party leadership who called this bill grotesque.
Come to the table, let's look at the numbers. If I'm wrong, prove that I'm wrong, but let's do it with respect, but mainly respect for our children and grandchildren. This is immoral, what us old farts are doing to our young people. This is grotesque what we're doing. We need to own up to that. This is our moment. I can't accept this scenario. I can't accept it, so I won't vote for it unless we are serious about fixing it.
So Johnson here is talking about specifically raising the deficit, but all of this comes as Musk continues to bash the bill and has threatened to, quote-unquote, fire GOP lawmakers who back this bill, which is to say he'll spend a lot of money that won't matter a lot to him to oust them from office next year. Which brings us to the end here. And the idea that all of this stuff, the bill, the immigration, the Federalist Society fallout, I think points to a couple things. First, and less importantly, I'll admit that, Stephen Miller seems to be involved in a lot of the stuff right now that is straining the White House, to put it mildly. He appears to be the common denominator of all this right now, or at least in a lot of it, but he's also kind of untouchable in the White House. Trump likes him a lot, but worth paying attention to. Second, what we're seeing here is the breakneck speed at which this administration has been trying to do all of the things it wants to do all at once is catching up to it. It's doing so many massive things that have so frequently been at odds with one another because there are so many things happening that not everyone is on the same page, and it's tearing things apart. And what happens next will be something to pay really close attention to, because with Musk out, but still willing to throw his money around, and Trump still the leader of the cult of personality that has become the Republican Party, Republicans will have to choose between inviting the wrath of the richest man on the planet or the man who controls their party and its voters. The choice might tear the party in two. And how Republicans thread that needle, if it can even be threaded in the first place, will affect all of us. And that is it for today's episode. Please rate and review the show on whatever podcast app you're listening to this on. Like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications on YouTube so you don't miss out on any new video episodes there. Subscribe to the Make It Make Sense Substack. That bottom tier is just $5 a month, and paid subscribers get access to all sorts of great content. And if you don't want to do that, no sweat, but please share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word, on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on Twitter and Blue Sky, and at Grant Herms TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.